With only 2 months away before Rugby League kicks off for another year, 28 teams across 2 competitions can begin to dare dream again that they arise as Rugby League champions above all others. Yes, hello and welcome to the Sideline Chat podcast, the one-stop shop for Rugby League. Alongside Mark Henry, I'm Conor Marcellus, and today we'll be looking at the fortunes of those who dare to dream in the Betfred Super Leauge, and we kick off with the Castleford Tigers. So Mark, what do you see with Castleford's recruitment? How well do you think they have done in the process?
Well, they only gained 4, lost 6, so it's hurts them a little bit. But looking at the players gained, they have recruited well, and they've recruited well across a minimal amount of teams. So don't know if that's going to be a good thing or not, but they have lost a few players to other clubs, even out of the Betfred Super Leauge clubs. So it will be interesting to see how they go.
The losses Mark is referring to, of course, is probably one of the biggest losses they've suffered. Mike McMeekin, an England back rower, departing for the Catalans Dragons, whilst other departures include Matt Cook, leaving for the Championship, joining up with the Widnes Vikings. Bailey Hodgson, nephew of England and Raiders dummy half and captain Josh Hodgson, has joined up with the Newcastle Knights on a 3-year deal. Whilst Junior Moores has just been released, with yet confirmed where he's going to end up. On the other side, Jordan Turner coming in, as well as Siwa Matangi from the Huddersfield Giants, the latter joining on a 1-year loan deal, whilst Lewis Bienick joins from Hull FC and Niall Evalds from the Salford Red Devils. Now, you reckon Evalds is going to start first up for the Tigers?
Yes, I reckon Niall Evalds will slot straight into the fullback, and he could also be used on a wing throughout the season if he is required, depending on injuries and suspensions and all that throughout the year. But I reckon he'll predominantly play fullback in 2021 for Castleford Tigers.
I think Castleford had the problem after they lost Zach Hardacre in the run-up to the 2017 Grand Final. They haven't been able to replace him. Since 2018, they've tried Ben Roberts at fullback, they've tried Peter Mataldier at fullback, Jordan Rankin got a run at fullback at the start of last year, I should say, but none of them have clicked. Then they pick up Gareth O'Brien, just picking off the carcass of what was the Toronto Wolfpack, picking him up now locked in on a 3-year deal full-time. I just think Daryl Powell's got to run into a bit of a trap if he's trying to chop and change his spine, because we know Man of Steel Paul McShane's going to be a dummy half, Jake Truman and Danny Richardson are going to be the first choice in the halves, so you really don't want to be chopping and changing the top end of your spine, swapping Evalds in 1 week for O'Brien and then just reversing the decision a couple of weeks later.
Definitely not. I'd say the coach of Castleford, bear with me, he would probably trial the first 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks with Evalds at fullback and O'Brien on the wing. And then if that works out well, then you'll keep them. If not, they will chop and change for another time frame, and then they'll settle once they get to a rhythm and what works best for them.
I think the biggest thing will be trying to replace Mike McMeekin, because he was sort of like a weapon for them out on the right edge. Now, I think the word is they're going to use Chase Blair on the right edge with Oliver Holmes on the other side, and Mataldier and
Sasai Feki?
No, Feki's a winger, not a set.
Oh.
Mataldier and Michael Shenton will be the starting centres for Castleford.
Well, Pete Mataldier, if you come from down under, he's a good player, can play very consistent football, so we'll see how he goes with the back line at the Tigers.
I think all in all for Castleford, last year was something of a disappointment. I think the expectations were that they signed Danny Richardson up from St Helens. It was going to change the way they attacked, having been semi-finalists in 2019. They started off well. I mean, even though the result against Toronto is now expunged, they were definitely in the fight early. And picking off wins against Wigan and St Helens definitely helped their cause. I think coronavirus has just knocked them about, as it has to a number of other clubs we'll be talking about later on. But since then, they've got, from going 4-2 with the Toronto result expunged, it's just led to another collapse. I mean, You look at the first game back against Catalans. They were up 14-0 and lost 40-14. How do you lose a game 40-14 when you're up 14-0. Can you explain that?
Possibly they were trying to protect the scoreboard too much, so they were more worried about them keeping the lead, if not extending the lead, but it just didn't work. Injuries could have came into a factor. Sin bins or the equivalent just might have not clicked, and probably the interchanges probably came in and didn't quite work. They probably didn't have enough time together to create combinations and work well with the other team. So there's a number of factors that could have led to that result.
I probably think the biggest factor with not being able to play together with all those combination changes was there were fade-outs. There were games in Castleford's grasp that they could have got to, but in the end, they just fell away. I think one example here, the Huddersfield Giants, they were up 13-12 at half-time, but ended up losing 31-19 in the second half. And it's not the first game. There have been games against Hull, Warrington, FC, I should say. Hey, for all our Hull viewers out there, don't attack us later on. Warrington and Leeds, they were basically playing with about 12 men for 50 minutes in certain games, especially after Oliver Holmes got sent off in the game against the Rhinos. That's where they went down by 28-24. So fade-outs, and I think they're, right now, I see them the equivalent of the 2017-18 Canberra Raiders side. A side that we expect to do well, but always ends up failing to succeed.
Yep.
All right, so we haven't actually got the fixtures yet. The RFL have decided they're going to hold off due to the UK's situation with the coronavirus, so we're going to hang off on trying to predict how they're going to shape up in the first 5 rounds.
I reckon, speaking of the fixtures, I reckon it'll be released between our 2nd and 3rd, maybe even 3rd and 4th episode. That's when I.
So you're thinking 2 weeks' time,
that's when
closing into the end of January.
Yep. So I know more of the situation of COVID-19 over there. So once they know more of the situation over there, they will release the fixtures. But of course, there are more than likely going to be changes to the fixtures as the ongoing virus is going on.
I think if you're trying to find like the best player in the Castleford Tigers side, I think one, you have to point at Paul McShane. I think if he wasn't there for the games he was involved with, Castleford wouldn't have won as many games as they did post the lockdown. And the fact that he was awarded the Man of Steel speaks volumes to his contribution to that Tigers side. Mm-hmm. One player that I felt that didn't necessarily stand out, and I probably think this is no fault of his own, but Sasaya Feki. I think we built him up as this marquee man that was going to take over for Castleford and on the left edge and unseat Greg Eden. But the opposite has happened. He's only played 1 game, Challenge Cup match, and then he got injured again. So he has not had a happy time on the field. That's not his fault.
No.
But I think you look at the wingers they got, I think Alfords and Greg Eden will end up as the starting wingers, and he might have to try and work his way into that somewhere.
But Greg Eden can play in the forwards too, can he not? Or am I mixing that with another
No,
player?
he's practically an outside back, and he's been Castleford's top try scorer for the last few years. Apart from last year, Daryl Alfords was, but Eden's still a good try scorer. I wouldn't leave him out of the side.
Well, he's in my starting 13 come round 1 for Castleford, along with fellow and former NRL regulars Pete Matario, Sasai Feki, Chase Blair. They will be on the starting side, and fellow recruits Matagi, Turner will be in the starting side as well, and Lewis Brynek will be used on the bench to kick off the season.
All right, how do we think 2021 looks for Castleford? I think that'll be the big question everyone wants to know.
It's depending on how strong their draw is. Like if it's a harder one, there'll be a few upsets. But if it's a fairly easy one, well then they'll expect them to be up there. But if they're in between, well, it can go either way for them. Really, they can't. It's depending on how tough their draw is for the season.
Ultimately, say the grand final winning sides, their seasons start with defence, and the way you start with defence is you tighten up and play for the full 80 minutes. Now you look at that Castleford side; they still got Liam Watts, Paul McShane, their halves, and Greg Eaton. So you got all your key players involved in there. I think if they keep them uninjured, I think this will be like a blur for where Castleford were. I mean, they were league leaders in 2017, and they were involved in this following two semi-finals against Wigan and Salford. So they're not a bad side, but even a good side like that can still have a bad year.
Definitely. Even like a top team like, I don't know, probably maybe St Helens or Warrington, they could even like it. Super League, it's a funny game. You can never. It's hard to tell who's going to come out firing until around about mid-season when there's a form starting to occur.
I mean, 27 rounds is a long time.
Oh, very much so.
And you throw in Challenge Cup commitments, you're practically looking at 30 games a year.
And if you use your top players there in the Challenge Cup, there's a risk of injury and suspensions there too. So, do you play your top players in the Challenge Cup, or do you rest some of them and play some of them? It's up to the coach, really.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure whoever watches this will correct us if we are wrong on the matter. But last year, Castleford finished 9th on the tail. Mark Hendry, where do you see the Tigers finishing in 2021?
I feel Castleford will make the playoff series and will finish 5th overall in 2021.
All right, so you're going Castleford for 5th. Yeah. I'll go Castleford to finish 4th on the table. And you can double check that with us of the ladder position later on. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about the only French side left in the Betfred Super Leauge. I mean, if Toulouse had won that position, the Lee Centurions did, we would have been talking about two French sides. Alas, we're talking about one. Catalan Dragons, sort of an interesting 2020 season they had, you would say.
Yeah, very much so. They were there or thereabouts, but couldn't quite. Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure that all the headlines heading into last year's season, it was all about Sonny Bill Williams and the Toronto Wolfpack. And then
definitely.
Out of the blue comes Israel Folau. Now, we're not going to talk about Israel Folau and his personal beliefs. That doesn't matter. What does matter is his on-field performances and his contribution to the Dragons' attack.
Very much so. He's a quality player, so expect to see a lot of him in 2021.
I think there was a lot of expectation around the Dragons because not only was Israel Folau a big signing, but James Maloney was the biggest signing.
Oh, definitely.
I think you look at Haas in the past, I think Stacey Jones was another big name for all the Dragons in their younger days, but signing Maloney, that changes everything.
Definitely. He brings a lot of experience to the club, and he knows how to manage big games and can be that player that does kick the final field goal, or the final conversion or penalty goal to win the game for the team. He's a big game player, James Maloney.
Well, I mean, the Dragons were sitting somewhat comfortable. I wouldn't say 3-1 from 6 games was possible because this is where coronavirus really started to take hold between England and France. So they had fixtures that they couldn't complete, and of course their position would have been inflated or deflated depending on how the ladder was restructured afterwards. But I think coming out of lockdown, I mean, they played Saints up first, and it was not a pretty sight whatsoever. But next 2 weeks, a combined score of 98-14. And that we're touching on with Castleford, we're talking about how they came back from a 14-0 deficit and smashed them 40-14. That, there were slow starts, second half fade outs, but to finish 4th, I mean, talk about the teams in front of you. You're talking Wigan, you're talking St Helens and the Warrington Wolves. To be 4th behind them, that says a lot about you and Steve McNamara as a coach.
Definitely. Being up competing with the top 3 clubs, like you said, the Warrington Wolves, St Helens and Wigan Warriors, they're like the benchmarks in the Super League. But if you compete there and push them a little bit more, they may crumble and you could easily find yourself in top position, if not fighting in amongst them all, and cause a lot more upsets.
Well, Catalan did indeed cause an upset in the first week at the playoffs. They absolutely destroyed the Leeds Rhinos in the first 30 minutes. I saw that game. And Sam Tompkins, I watched Sam Tompkins closely. 3 try assists he setting up, I believe it was David Mead, Israel Folau, and Samisoni Langi. Again, you can correct us in the comments down below. But Tompkins absolutely destroyed the Rhinos, and Richard Agar's men were not able to recover after that first half blitz. But of course, when you come up against quality opposition like St Helens in the semi-final, that was just all the hard work just undone from the following week.
Yeah. Like I said, coming against the top side doesn't help your cause. But you made the finals. You expect to play the top team, so you just had to test yourselves and try and not burn all your energy from kickoff. You play a bit conservative, and then once they get into the rhythm, you know what their play, their attacks like, what their defense is like, and then you can start picking out the weaknesses in both attack and defense, and start piling on the points.
I think for Catalan, this is their second best moment, because if fans will easily remember, the Dragons were in the bottom 8, or in the bottom 4, I should say, of the Super League table, and forced to play in the qualifiers. They finished 5th behind the Lee Centurions, and it was really a nice edge whether they would go back to the Championship, or first time, I should say, or they stay in Super League by a nice edge, and I think they got lucky.
Very much so.
And I think this is a side on the up. I mean, you look at the casualties in the transfer market that they've lost. Long-term servant Remy Casti, experienced forwards Sam Moa and Mikhail Simon, whilst Lucas Albert joins Carcassonne in the French Elite League, and David Mead, as I understand, has joined the Broncos, whether it's training trial at the moment?
I think it's training trial at the moment with a I don't know how many years, but a potential...
probably just 1 year, I think.
Probably a potential top 30 squad player for the Brisbane Broncos in Australia.
Which sort of leads into the point, there's going to be a problem with a leadership void. Because, I mean, when you've got a long-standing servant like Remy Casti not getting a new contract with the club, you're throwing a lot of players into the deep end with this. On the upside, though, Gil Dudson, relative experience coming off Salford, it's a fairy tale grand final side, and of course Mike McMeekin joins from the Castleford Tigers. There's, I think, stability in the front row, and there's a lot of competition that's going to open up in the back row with Joel Tompkins and Matt Whitley, which I think McMeekin's going to press his advantage early, with Tompkins missing time because of his attempt at a John Hopewati impersonation.
Yeah,
it's not really something to laugh about.
Yeah.
I mean, no one would appreciate.
No, sorry,
the Hopewati effect whatsoever.
No.
Something else that will sort of not work in the Dragons' favour. Michael McAlorum is also going to miss time, 6 rounds, in fact. So he's going to miss the first month and a half of the season.
Due to injury or suspension.
A D grade other contrary behaviour charge and a B grade high tackle charge.
So suspension.
But I mean, look at it this way: Catalan are not looking to win the championship in the first 6 months. It's 27 rounds, hopefully 27 rounds, because you never know what's going on with coronavirus at this stage.
No one does.
But I think when round 7 comes round, I think it's going to look a little bit different for the Dragons. I think they'll get McAlorum back. Match fitness might be an issue, but he'll still be training. Yeah, but I think Catalan can do all right. So last year, the Dragons finished 4th and were in the semi-final. Bow out to St Helens. I think they finished 3rd this time round. What say you?
Well, as you said about Dudson and McMeekin coming in, they'll come straight into the starting side because they've already star players such as Sam Tompkins, Israel Folau, James Maloney, Sam Cassiano, and Josh Drinkwater. On paper, I view they have got one of the strongest squads across the Super League. They're slowly making their way up the ladder. As in 2017, they finished 10th. 2018, they finished 8th. 2019, finished 7th. And they finished 4th in 2020. So I see them making the finals and finishing 3rd in 2021. And maybe even go one better in 2022. Even could finish in 2021. But overall, I finished...
Should also mention, Lewis Tierney is not going to be part of this because he swapped the south of France for the Lee Centurions. And so I thought, better get that across before we get corrected.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to get fact-checked by people if they comment, so it doesn't matter either way.
No.
Hey, so, majority decision, we both think the Dragons are 3rd on the table.
Yes.
All right, now turning to the Huddersfield Giants. Now, this one This was a very interesting year as well for Huddersfield, but one that very much ended in disappointment.
Yes, very much so. They will be looking for a better 2021 and hopefully can prove others wrong based on the 2020 performance. Hopefully they can turn them, I don't know what word you would use, turn the fortunes around. There you go.
I think this is another team that suffered because of the lockdowns. I think the Giants were comfortably inside the top 5 as it was initially, and they had a good record behind them, including knocking off St Helens and at the John Smith Stadium, I believe it was. But out of the lockdown, it just went south. I mean, I think everyone would know about Leeds versus Huddersfield and what happened in that game. Like, the Giants shot out to a 26-6 lead, and you would think with somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes left on the clock, the Rhinos were finished, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wrong. That was so wrong. And for that game to go to 26-all, Luke Gale to set up a drop goal finish to win 27-26, that was just pure insanity. I wonder what Simon Walford was thinking. It's just like, what is going on? It was 5 tries to 1. They put 4 tries on the level with us.
He was probably pulling his hair out. Literally pulling his hair out, trying to get his head around why didn't they just finish it off. But drama-filled games, they happen every once in a while, and it's good entertainment for the fans and everyone watching either at the stadium or on TV. It's an all-round entertainment.
Unfortunately for Huddersfield fans, the entertainment sort of dropped off after that. What happened next, leading through to the end of the season, 3-11 record from 14 games they played.
Yeah, that's not good.
And there was also talk, because there was that one clash, I think it was Hull FC, they were talking Aidan Caesar up, had a good performance, mainly Australian media, talking about him potentially being offered to the Roosters as a halfback. And I'm just like, hey, come on. He just signed a 3-year deal with Huddersfield, and you're talking of him breaking contracts?
Yeah.
Not professional.
No, not
And besides, Hull won that game. I mean, you're talking about an outstanding player in a losing side, but you're not talking about the other side that actually won the game in tight circumstances.
Yeah.
And of course, Simon Walford departed partway through the restart. I think maybe because he thought his job was done, or it was the case that other circumstances prevailed. And Luke Robinson took over. He got those 3 wins, including a couple on the trot, but yeah, this didn't pan out in the Giants' favour.
No, not at all. But hopefully the fortunes turn around for them in this upcoming season in 2021.
Well, their fortunes, they actually could have played the playoffs. They were probably sitting there and thinking, if only someone in the top 6 teams actually tested positive. Not that they were thinking that, but the contingency was, if someone between St Helens and Hull FC tested positive for coronavirus, Huddersfield and Salford, both of them, either one or both of them, would have been drafted in as like an emergency plan. But that necessarily wasn't the case, and Huddersfield ended up finishing 7th on the table. Just unlucky to make the playoffs.
Very unlucky for the Giants. In the transfer market, though, it hasn't really affected them. They've got 5 losses, 4 gains. So, it's better. 6 losses and 4 gains, my bad. But they have got some good players coming in from, not only from Australia, but such as Jack Cogger and Ricky Latelli. But they've got Jack Ashworth coming from St Helens, which is probably a loss for them, and Josh Jones from Hull FC.
On top of Joe Greenwood coming in from the Wigan Warriors, he hasn't really had much opportunity. Hopefully, there's opportunity for him to start there.
Yep.
Josh Jones and Luke Yates, of course. Former Hull man Josh Jones leaving in Hull for Huddersfield, and Luke Yates, probably one of the more highly rated forwards in the Salford pack, joining Ian Watson at the John Smith Stadium for 2021. Rhys Butterworth leaving for Dewsbury. Of course, Siwa Matungi joining Castleford on a 1-year loan. And Jordan Turner also leaving for the Tigers.
But a big loss for them is also Akila Uarte. He is a strike weapon out wide. So him retiring is not going to help their cause, but I'm sure they'll have plenty of backup option.
Jermaine McGilvery was the recognised England winger, and Darnell McIntosh is also a very capable winger as well. And then you look at the centres, they'll have Latelli on one side and Jake Wardle on the other, who really also emerged as well.
Yeah.
Forwards are going to be interesting. I think, like Catalan, there's going to be competition for back row spots, considering you'll have Kenny Edwards, Chris McQueen, Joe Wardle, and then you'll have Joe Greenwood and Josh Jones also joining. And I think Luke Yates, he'll end up starting at loose forward over Michael Lawrence.
Probably. It'll just be coming down to see who's... Come down to the selectors on possibly even game day. Yes, they'll probably release the team lists.
They'll be in the 21-man squad, and I think it'll be up to Ian Watson's coaching staff to decide how he wants to shape up this side he's got.
Also, come down to game day to see who gets the forward spots. It's going to be so competitive. It's going to be hard to make a call. But if someone gets injured or suspension, there's plenty of there's still good options available to the staff at the Giants.
Well, Huddersfield the only silverware Huddersfield have won in the last 8 or so years, maybe let's just say 10 years. The League Leaders Shield in 2013 when they were a gun side, and they've appeared in semi-finals since then. But with Ian Watson joining and knowing that he's taken Salford to both the Super League Grand Final and the Challenge Cup Final in 2 years, there's going to be a lot of pressure and expectation on him. Now, he's walking into a good side at Huddersfield. He's got the makings of it.
Definitely.
I think he's sort of the talk was, how is he going to perform in a bigger club when he was performing well at a smaller club? Like, it could be reverse as fortune, like under pressure at the big club, whereas you could succeed with the smaller ones.
Who knows? It'll just have to come down to what team he sticks with, and the main 17 can stay fit throughout the year, then watch them come up the ladder.
Last year, Huddersfield ended up finishing 7th overall. Look, this is going to be very, very close. There's going to be 8 sides looking to get into that top 6.
Yeah.
But I think with the other sides on paper, I can't in good faith see Huddersfield end up in the top 6. So I'm going to say they end up finishing 7th.
Well, they've recruited as in Jack Cotter, who can play in the halves, and I think at centre, if it is required. I could be wrong. So,
halfback 5'8", Cogger mainly plays.
Yeah. He did get his chances over here in Australia, so if he goes over there, working under Aiden Caesar, who's had plenty of experience. I know he's only had 1 year in the Super League, but he's had more experience in professional league overall. I'm making a big call and saying that Caesar and Cogger will be one of the best halves pairings in the league.
Well, you're going to be contested on that because you're looking
Yes.
St. Helens with Johnny Lomax and Theo Farge, Wigan with Tommy Lualai and Jackson Hastings, as well as Warrington with Blake Austin and Gareth Widdop.
Hence why I said one of the best halves pairings, not the best, one of the best. If the whole team stays fit, not only the halves but the whole team, I think that they could be a dark horse in 2021, and I'll put them as finishing comfortably in 6th position.
So one that says just missed the playoffs, the other one that says inside the playoffs. Make of that as you will.
Easily in the playoffs.
Now moving on, we've got Hull FC to look at. Now the black and whites. I mean, if you're looking for consistency with this side, if you're looking for a word to define Hull FC, if it's consistent, then it's not that word.
No.
Once again, they started off looking like Jekyll and Hyde. They were putting on good performances as 1 week, but then getting smashed the other week.
Yeah.
And it unfortunately cost Lee Radford his play as head coach of Hull FC.
Too much inconsistency, like as you mentioned, smashing 1 week, winning 1 week, and then getting smashed next. That's just too inconsistent. They can't keep that up if they want to make the finals or playoffs. They just can't keep it doing. But who knows what can happen? It's a funny game, rugby league.
Well, it seems that after the restart, because again, we got to talk about lockdown, Andy Last coming in, not a good start. They got trounced by Salford. I mean, you're looking at 54-18. You going to say that's a good performance?
And definitely not. That is a shocking performance.
Well, well, they turned it around, of course.
Oh, yeah. But
also, I mean, they ended up pulling off 5 wins from the last 6 games to be included when the top 6 was extended from top 5. So
they've come back and did that well, only losing 1 out of the last 6.
And there were some tight games that they were caught up in as well. I mean, like, against Castleford, it's always tight games, and they are the Tigers' bogey side.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they didn't get that far. I mean, well, when I say far, I mean, they beat Warrington.
Which is probably hard to do, as they're one of the top sides, but a win's a win.
A tight game, but they were able to keep the Wolves out of the game.
Yep.
And then they were bounced out by Wigan 29-2.
Yeah. Why 2? They should have been maybe at least get within probably 6 points, 10 points even, but just couldn't quite get there.
I think one man that really stood out for me, it was Jake Connor. I mean, you can play him at standoff or in the back end. He was playing fullback, and I think he was influential. The back end of the season, his performances against crosstown rivals Hull Kingston Rovers and that elimination playoff against Warrington, Connor was the man to go to, and he was the one dominating everything.
Yeah.
In the past, he has been known to show ill discipline. All you have to do is look up the World War III highlights between Hull FC and the Featherstone Rovers from a couple of years back to understand why.
Yeah.
Well, that was not completely him, but he did get involved in that.
Yeah. He kind of like he's kind of sounds like the player that will be, if there's something going on in the field, he'll get involved with it, regardless of like what it is. He'll just have to get involved to it. But hopefully that changes for him and he has a good season without getting into much trouble, if any.
If he gets involved in scuffles, they'll get criticism. But other than that, his discipline's been very good. Only gave away 4 penalties last year.
That's not bad considering, like you said, of his discipline. Could have been a lot higher. He'll probably try and eliminate most of that, if not all of that, from his game, which is hard to do. So hopefully it's only maybe 1 or 2 penalties this season.
Yeah, and of course Josh Jones. Now we know things don't always work out. I mean, there was expectations when you moved from Salford's grand final side to join other clubs, and now he only lasted like a couple of games. And with the rise of Andre Cervello, or the return to form for Andre Cervello, and the rise of loose forward Joe Cater, Jones had no choice. He lost his place in the side. So I think looking at next year, or this year I should say, God, I've made that mistake so many times just talking about setting this thing up. But with Andre Cervello and Manu Ma'u in the back on the edges, with Joe Cater in the middle, there was no guarantee Jones could get a spot on the starting side. So I think the move to Huddersfield could actually benefit him.
Yeah, very much so. Recruitment did not go, or as of we speak, they could change.
Well, as we understand, Brett Hodgson, in his first year as coach of Hull FC, he's still looking for names, you think, just to shore up some key positions. But looking at this, Gareth Ellis in his second retirement, that's actually serious. He did come out of retirement in 2019, and then he's gone off and retired again. Lewis Bienick joining the Castleford Tigers, whilst Ratu Nalago returns to rugby union to join the Bristol Bears. And the only gain, as to this point, is Josh Reynolds from the Tigers.
West's Tigers in the NRL.
Yes, West
not
Tigers.
Not Castleford Tigers.
Yes. It's important we differentiate.
And then they've got also they've released Albert Kelly to come back to
the Broncos.
Australia in Brisbane Broncos.
Train and trial contract.
Yeah, Ryan Johnson, Charlie Patterson, and Charlie Graham have all also been released.
I think the big thing is how Brett Hodgson assembles his spine, because I think many people on both sides of the world have been talking about Reynolds starting in the halves with Mark Sneed.
Yeah, I don't see that working out. I see their halves as Mark Sneed and Jake Connor in the halves. They're, as I said, Jake Connor's good, but having him next to Mark Sneed, that will be a good combination. And so I personally feel Josh Reynolds probably maybe play dummy half, depending on injuries and etc. But he'll be looking to get back to his career best form in England. He didn't have the. He was too inconsistent over here. He was in and out of the squad. Injuries didn't help, so he'll be hoping to
Not
start
to mention
fresh
the
again.
size of his pay packet that he was
Yes.
on at the Tigers didn't help his case either.
No, but he'll be looking to start fresh over in England and get consistent, be consistently in the team, whether it's off the bench or in the dummy half. We'll just have to wait and see how the team sheets are coming into the rounds throughout the season.
Personally, I don't think Reynolds will actually make it into the starting side. I mean, considering that he's one of the marquee signings, everyone's going to think he is going to be there. But,
Yeah.
I mean, if you put Reynolds in the halves, where do you put Connor? I mean, you'll have Jamie Shaw coming back from injury, and he's your first choice fullback.
Yeah.
Danny Houghton is your veteran captain, and Jordan Johnston has emerged as like the backup dummy half option and successor to Houghton
Yeah.
when possibly his contract runs out in 2022.
Yeah.
So how do you fit Reynolds into that side when you're sort of looking at the options already available?
Well, as I said, he could come off the bench. He could be just there for injury cover for like their top two or top two or three players. They get injured, well, you could slot him in. But like I said, he'll be trying to get more consistent game time over there. But
I mean,
it doesn't.
at his
look good the
best, he was part of the Blues Origin squad that broke the dynasty.
moment. Yes.
And he was also part of the Bulldogs Grand Final side that came from 7th to qualify for the 2014 Grand Final, albeit losing to the Rabbitohs in the
Yes.
back 20 minutes.
Yes. So he knows we know what he can do. It's just whether he can replicate that on the field for Hull FC in 2021.
Like I said, I think there are teams. When I was making my ladder predictions, I was tossing and turning between three clubs: Huddersfield, Hull FC, and the Warrington Wolves. I just think there is a lot of competition. I was humming and hawing. Who do I put 6th to 8th? But I've made my mind up. So last year, Hull finished 6th and made it into the semi-finals. I just think there are sides ahead of them, and it's going to be close to call, but I just think it's going to be just a little bit more of the same, just until Brett Hodgson finds his feet as a head coach. So I'm going to say they finish 8th.
No, with the amount as we speak, like there's always more player signings can happen, but as we speak, with losing 11 players and only gaining one, not good. So I don't think they will have the team to make the playoffs. So I'll put them in 7th.
All right, so 7th and 8th for that. All right, that's the teams covered for this moment. And now moving on to a little bit of news and discussion. Now, as it was announced by the Betfred Super League and the RFL, the World Club Challenge for 2021 is going to be postponed because of the coronavirus situation in the United Kingdom at the moment. It's no longer starting in its regular February time slot. And I think many people would have been critical of this in the past. I think referring back 4 years ago to when in the World Club Series in its 2-game format was, the Storm didn't want to travel to Warrington to face the Wolves, and they sent the Broncos in their place. So the logistics of it at the time, I don't think they worked. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it should be one game and see who comes out better on top from Australia or England. But who knows what they're thinking behind the scenes, and we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Well, I'm going to offer up sort of like what I think the World Club Challenge, where it should be extended. Now, Sunday the 3rd of October, we know that's going to be the NRL Grand Final, and it's already been publicised that the 9th to the 10th of October, depending which time zone you're in, will be the Betfred Super League Grand Final.
Yep, that's locked in.
So my idea is no longer have the World Club Challenge at the start of the year. Instead, you have it after the two grand finals are complete, so you get teams at peak physical performance, and you only have to worry about the travel for the preseason. I mean, same argument again, but it would be better than trying to drag one side over before the comp starts, instead dragging a club over once the comps have ended.
But you do have an issue with fatigue happening at the end of the year, but
the way sports science works these days, the fatigue factor can be managed, and you plot it at a time. I mean, you've seen the way teams have come back out from the World Cup back in 2017. So this is the date I offer, the 16th to the 17th of October.
Depending on time zone.
Well, yes, I already mentioned that point.
Yeah.
But have St. Helens and the Melbourne Storm, depending whether or not they're actually the premiers in both grand finals this year, but have it staged as an international doubleheader that the World Club Challenge goes down the same weekend the Trans-Tasman Test between Australia and New Zealand goes down. Because there has been talk of a test match after the grand final, hasn't there?
There definitely has been. Whether or not it'll work out, depending on what, because teams, like for example, the New Zealand team might have players in, like, say, the Melbourne Storm team, or there might be teams that might be playing in the World Cup Challenge, and then you got the Trans-Tasman Test, or they'll kind of have to see who gets first dibs, pretty much.
This is sort of what I've offered up. We know that the World Cup will be a week after this game if it goes ahead in this time slot.
Yeah.
My rationale is this has upsides for a lot of countries, because you look at the Melbourne Storm. I mean, sure, they got the Bromwich brothers, Brandon Smith, the Cheese, and Nelson Asofa Solomona. They're all going to be in the New Zealand Test side. So my logic is, why would you waste them or use them up in a standalone test match when the priority is for World Cup in a week's time? And having the Storm over there a week earlier before the World Cup opener between England and Samoa, there's upsides to this. Because it's not just the Kiwi contingent, but Pappenhausen. Oh, I should say Jerome Hughes would probably get a run for New Zealand as well.
Yep.
But Pappenhausen, Munster, Grant, they're going to be in the Australian Test side. Instead of fielding a full-strength Australia-New Zealand side, have it as a World Cup audition.
Yes, that is a
test the depth. Assess the side you're going to take to the World Cup. And like I said, not just New Zealand and Australia, but Kamikamifa for Fiji. I think Brenko Lee, would he be picked for Tonga, do you think?
Possibly be picked for Tonga.
And then you'll have Justin Olam for Papua New Guinea. So you get all the Storm's rep players over there, and they'll be fresh as a daisy after the World Club Challenge, or as fresh as you can get them.
And they would have been acclimatised to, like, they won't have any jet lag. They'll be acclimatised to the conditions in England.
Yep.
So it's a win-win situation for some things, but not in others.
I think there'll be backlash against this. There's always going to be backlash against something. But it makes more sense for the World Club Challenge to be played at the end of the year and have it continue running on in its traditional fashion rather than have it at the start of the year. Yeah. So I definitely think there's an opportunity to reshape the way the International Rugby League calendar is set up year in, year out.
Yeah. And have it consistent at the end of each year, not chop and change it all the time. Just have a consistent flow effect and happy days.
So I'll give you the final say. World Club Challenge, start of the year or the end of the year?
End of the year.
I'll go in favour of the end of the year. All right, well, that is full time from us. We'll be back here next week as we talk about Hull Kingston Rovers, the Challenge Cup champions, the recently promoted Lee Centurions, and the Salford Red Devils. Plus, can rugby league grow in the world's second largest population centre of India? Join us next time. This has been the Sideline Chat Podcast.